Brother mocked me at dinner. Still single. No wife, no kids, no life. My parents laughed. I set down my fork and said calmly, no mortgage either, because I paid yours for 8 months. The table went silent. Family dinners were not mandatory, but in my family, skipping one was treated like treason. I had not missed a single Sunday meal since I was 17, not because I craved the company, but because I knew exactly what they would say if I did not show up. They would say I was too busy to see my family. They would say Adam thought he was better than everyone now. The truth was, I did not think I was better. I just did not think they noticed me at all. The dining room still looked like it had not evolved since the 90s. There was the same glass fruit bowl in the center of the table, the same plastic protectors under the chairs, and the same chandelier that rattled every time the HVAC kicked on. My older brother Eric sat at the head of the table, like it was his birthright. He was 2 years older than me and the family favorite by a landslide. His wife Jessica was absent again, which meant the only other adults at the table were my parents, who still treated Eric like he was 6 years old and had just won a spelling bee. And then there was me, still seated next to the kitchen doorway. Mom called it the swing seat. In other words, it was the chair nobody ever fought for. Eric swirled his wine like he understood tannins and asked if I was still writing solo. I looked up from my plate, but he did not wait for a reply. He never did. He smirked so wide it could have been copyrighted and asked if I still had no wife, no kids, and no life. Dad chuckled. It was not a real laugh, not a belly laugh, more of a low grunt that said Eric had a point. Mom took a sip of wine and muttered something about career-obsessed men. I cut into the chicken. It was dry. That was not surprising. I stayed quiet because, honestly, what could I say that would register with people who still thought success meant Christmas card photos and a golden retriever named Buster? The truth was, I had a good life. I had a quiet condo on the other side of town. I had a job in operations management that paid me enough to live well, save better, and help some people who never even noticed. I had no debt, no kids, no chaos. Just calm. But in that house, calm meant nothing. Eric had 2 kids, a high-maintenance SUV he could not afford, and a LinkedIn profile that still said business consultant, though nobody could quite explain what he actually consulted on. And yet, he was the golden boy. I could have built a rocket and landed it in my parents' backyard, and they still would have asked Eric to fix the Wi-Fi. Eric poured himself more wine and said maybe I was alone because I never took risks. I blinked. Risks? Like the time Mom and Dad used my college fund to cover his startup idea, the one that crashed in 6 months. Or the time I worked 2 jobs just to stay in school, while he couch surfed across Europe, finding himself. No, I had taken risks, just not the kind that got toasted over dry chicken and passive-aggressive salads. Dad carved his turkey like a judge passing a sentence and said I had always played it safe. Safe. That word clanged in my chest like a rusty bell. In my family, safe meant invisible. Safe meant useful when needed and quiet the rest of the time. It was not just that dinner. It was the accumulation of years, missed birthdays, gifts returned unopened, jokes where I was the punchline instead of the guest of honor. And still, I showed up week after week. Why? Habit, guilt, hope. I looked at Eric. He looked smug and confident, like he believed every word he said because nobody had ever made him doubt it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. It was not rage. It was not revenge. It was readiness. I cut another piece of chicken and let the silence stretch for a few seconds too long, the kind of silence that made even confident men refill their glasses. Mom peered over her wine glass and asked if everything was all right. I nodded and said I was just thinking, and for once I meant it. I was not the kind of man who raised his voice. In that house, raising your voice just meant giving them more ammunition. It meant getting told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, or worse, just jealous. So I let things simmer, not in anger, but in strategy. Eric speared a potato like it owed him money, and said Jessica had been thinking about starting her own Etsy shop, maybe jewelry or candles or something. Mom immediately perked up and said it was a great idea because Jessica had always been so crafty. I nodded and said that sounded cool. Then Eric turned to me and asked if I could help her set up a business plan since I was good with boring spreadsheet stuff. There it was. It was not a real question. It was a casual assumption that I would drop everything and become their free consultant again. The last time I had spent 3 weekends helping him build a pitch deck for some fitness app he never launched. Before that, I had ghostwritten half of his resume. That was the job he still claimed had fallen through because the company was not ready for innovation. Still, I smiled and said that if Jessica was serious, she could email me. Eric raised an eyebrow, like the word email was offensive. He said I sounded like a customer service representative. I told him she could schedule a time like anyone else. He laughed and said I really was married to my calendar. Dad joined in and said I had always been that way and that my idea of fun was budgeting. Mom giggled and said maybe that was why I was still single. I do not know if they realized how often they made me the joke. I think in their minds it was affection. That twisted, backhanded family kind. Except affection does not feel like being shoved into a corner and told to smile. They never asked how I was doing. Not really. Not after I pulled 16-hour days during the pandemic to keep warehouse logistics from collapsing. Not when I bought my first condo at 29. Not even when I got promoted the year before and became regional lead for our entire district. What they did ask was whether I could fix Eric's taxes. I did. They asked if I could review their refinance paperwork. I did. They asked if I could co-sign Eric's car lease. I did not. They did not talk about that last one much, especially not after Eric forgot to make 3 payments in a row. I covered it quietly and paid it off just to save my own credit. I did not say a word. Why? Because silence is how you survive in a family where speaking up is mistaken for selfishness. Eric leaned back in his chair and rubbed his stomach like he had just eaten success itself. Then he asked if I was still doing that operations gig. I told him I was. He said it must be nice not to have to worry about feeding a family. He said I must have all that disposable income. I tilted my head and asked if he meant the kind of disposable income that disappeared on 3 streaming services, unpaid insurance, and the crypto scheme he pitched to Dad. He blinked. The table went still. Mom forced a tight laugh and told us to keep it light. Eric chuckled like it did not bother him, but his fork tapped a little louder after that. Then he said I did not get it. He said family was not about money. It was about being there and showing up. I stared at him for a beat too long. The irony practically strangled the air. Because when I thought of showing up, I thought of myself driving Mom to outpatient surgery when Eric had plans. I thought of myself covering Dad's emergency dental bill when his insurance lapsed. I thought of myself picking up Eric's kids from school twice the previous month because Jessica forgot. But sure, let's pretend I had been absent. I folded my napkin onto my plate and said, calm and measured, that I was there now. Eric scoffed and asked if I really was. For a second, I almost said it. I almost let the line fly, the one that had been quietly forming in my chest for weeks, the one that would flip the whole room inside out. But I did not. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my water. Cool, steady. I let it hang. I let them talk a little longer. I let them dig. They were so confident in their hierarchy, so sure of who carried the crown and who carried the dishes. They did not know the only reason the lights were still on in Eric's house was sitting across from him. And I was done being quiet. Just not that night. After dinner, the clatter of dishes echoed through the house like background noise to a show I was no longer watching. Eric was already sprawled on the couch like he had just clocked out from a 12-hour shift, instead of 2 hours of sitting, eating, and talking about himself. I was back in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands in the sink, like always. My parents did not ask, they just expected. Mom called out for me to grab the dessert plates without even turning around. I said, sure, and stacked them one by one. I had a dishwasher at my place. In that house, I was the dishwasher. I felt Dad's presence before I saw him. He leaned against the doorway with his wine glass still in his hand and asked what my plan was. I asked what he meant. He said he meant my life. I paused for half a second and told him that was a big question after mashed potatoes, He chuckled and said, I knew what he meant. He said I was not getting any younger. No kids, no house, no plan. He said I was stable, sure, but he wanted to know what I was building. I rinsed a fork and let the water run. I could have told him I was building peace. I could have told him I had savings investments and a quiet little life that did not require anyone's applause. But I knew what he meant. Where was the white picket fence? The smiling children? The dog named Buster? I told him I was doing fine. He nodded like the word fine disappointed him. Then he said my brother was under a lot of pressure, and I might not understand what it was like to have to provide. I stopped rinsing. The irony nearly choked me. Because I was providing, just not in the way he knew. I had been covering Eric's mortgage for 8 months, ever since the bank called me out of nowhere because Eric had listed me as his emergency contact. Payments had been missed. The account was heading toward default. His credit score was so low it needed a ladder. And instead of owning up to it, Eric just kept pretending. I did not tell anyone. I did not expose him. I just fixed it. For the kids. For my own sanity. I walked back out as Mom set down the dessert tray. The cookies were store-bought, but surprisingly decent. Eric sat up straighter and announced that he and Jessica were thinking of upgrading. Maybe Oak Ridge, better schools, more space. Mom beamed and said that was wonderful. Eric nodded seriously and said they just needed a little help with the down payment. I did not react. He kept going and said maybe we could all pitch in, like a family investment. Dad nodded without blinking and said that made sense. Then they all looked at me, like it was obvious. Eric leaned in and said I could front it just until he locked in his next contract. That mythical contract. The one that had been in talks for 2 years. I asked how much we were talking. He shrugged and said 40 grand. My laugh almost escaped. Not because of the number, but because he said it like he was asking to borrow a hoodie. Then he casually added that I had no kids and no mortgage. No mortgage. The man who had been living off my quiet bank transfers thought I was coasting. The room waited for my answer like it was already a yes. They were not asking, they were assuming. I stood up and brushed crumbs off my jeans. Mom asked where I was going. I said I had an early morning and meetings. Eric smirked and asked if I was still married to my calendar. I looked at him and smiled. I told him it was better than being married to a fantasy. His smile faltered just a hair. I reached for my coat and told him to have Jessica email me and that we could talk about candles once the heat was off. Then I left. No scene, no shouting, just a quiet crack in their little reality. But it was enough. The fuse was lit. The next morning, I got up at 6:15. Not because I had to. My first meeting was at 9. I got up because I liked having time before the world started asking things from me. My condo was quiet, my coffee was strong, and for once, my to-do list did not include fixing someone else's mess. Then my phone buzzed. Eric called at 6:37. I did not pick up. He called again at 7:10, then again at 8. I finally checked the voicemail while making breakfast. He said he was not sure what was going on, but he had just gotten a weird alert from the bank about a bounced payment. He said he thought we had it all set up and asked if I could check whether something glitched on my end. My end. The man did not even ask why I was paying it. He just assumed I had screwed up, like this was a shared project and not a one-man rescue mission. I pulled up my banking app and scrolled through the payment history. 8 straight months. On time, every time. $2,173.49. That was what I had been auto-transferring to cover his mortgage. The mortgage he had let slide without telling Jessica or our parents. The mortgage that, if left unpaid, would have left his kids living in their in-laws' cramped basement. I only found out by accident. The bank called me because they thought I was his cosigner. I was not. Eric had just added me as an emergency contact, probably assuming nothing would ever go wrong. Or if it did, I would handle it. Because I always did. That night, I had called the bank, opened a secondary account, and quietly paid the debt. No lecture, no drama, no demand that he owe me. And now he was calling me at 6:30 in the morning like I was his personal IT help desk. I tapped the pause transfer button. Done. No more lifeline. Let's see how long it takes the golden child to realize who kept his kingdom standing. 3 hours later, he left another voicemail. His voice was 10 degrees more panicked. He said Jessica was on him hard now. He said he thought I had it on autopay. He said she had found out the last 8 payments were under my name, and he asked if that was true. Then he asked why I had not told him. I did not reply, because the answer was simple. I wanted to see how long he would lie to himself. At 5:12 that evening, Mom called, straight to voicemail. She said my brother was a little upset. There was some mortgage issue. Eric had told her maybe it was something I set up that was now broken. She asked if I could just call him and sort it out. There it was, not asking if I was okay, not asking why I had been paying his mortgage, just asking if I could fix it again. I turned off my phone and went for a walk. No music, just crisp evening air and the sound of someone else's world falling apart in my pocket. The next morning, I checked my inbox. There it was, an urgent final notice before default, addressed to Eric and Jessica with me copied on the email. The bank did not even wait. Eric was 3 days away from default. And for the first time, I was not the buffer between him and consequences. I was just a name on the email. The one who used to quietly solve everything. Then came a text from Jessica. She said she had just seen the email. She said she did not know. She did not know I had been paying the whole time. Eric had told her they were caught up. She asked why I had not said anything. I stared at her message. Then another one came in. She said she was really sorry and that this should not have been on me. There it was. Not a full apology, but it cracked the surface. Suddenly, someone realized I had been cleaning up a mess I did not make, and I had finally stopped mopping. I did not respond. I did not need to. I let them sit in the silence they had never noticed until I left it. For once, they were feeling the weight I had carried quietly for years. I was on my second cup of coffee when the intercom buzzed. It never buzzed. Nobody showed up unannounced at my building unless they were a delivery driver or a neighbor who had locked themselves out. I checked the camera feed. Eric. He was wearing his signature "I just came from a meeting" outfit. Button-up shirt, loosened tie, the world's worst poker face. I considered not letting him in, but that would have been too easy. Instead, I buzzed the door and left it unlocked. He stormed in like he owned the place. He did not even look around. He just marched straight into my living room, like this was a confrontation scene from a television drama. He snapped that he needed answers. I sipped my coffee and asked if he was not even going to say hi or tell me it was a nice place. He looked around like it was the first time he realized I did not live in a shoebox. Open floor plan, polished concrete floors, framed prints, plants I actually kept alive. Then he said flatly that I had been paying his mortgage. I did not deny it. He added that I had been doing it for 8 months. I said yes. He asked why. I tilted my head and asked if he would have preferred foreclosure. He blinked, then sat down slowly. His confidence took a hit, like he had walked in with a sword and realized it was rubber. He muttered that he had not asked me to. I told him no, he had not, but he had listed me as an emergency contact. The bank called me when he skipped 2 payments. Jessica did not know, Mom and Dad did not know, and he did not return my call. He shifted uncomfortably and said he figured it was a one-time thing. I told him he missed 3 more payments after that. He rubbed his face and said he had been waiting on a contract. I asked if it was the same contract he had mentioned over dessert the previous weekend. Silence. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words got stuck somewhere between shame and delusion. Finally, he said I had made him look like a joke. I laughed out loud. I asked if he really thought I had made him look like a joke. Then I told him he had been performing his one-man fantasy for months. The bank almost took his house, and he was posting beach photos with captions about grind season. He stood up and said I could have told him. I agreed. I could have. But he had not asked, not once. He had just assumed someone would take care of it. He said that was not true. I cut him off and told him that even now he was not apologizing. He was just mad that I had stopped. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. I leaned forward and told him the truth. He had been living off the idea that I was the lonely brother with no life. Meanwhile, while he was playing grown-up with leased cars and expired credit cards, I was covering his roof, his kids' safety, and the late-night online orders he pretended were for the business. His eyes widened. Yes, I knew about the Amazon receipts too. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder labeled Receipts and Mortgage. It had every payment I had made, every month. Every time he went out to dinner and posted about hard work paying off, I was the one literally paying. He did not even look at the screen. He just sat down again, slower this time, quieter. He mumbled that he had not meant for it to be like that. I told him no. He just did not care how it was, as long as he was not the one dealing with it. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that makes you realize someone has just met reality for the first time. Then he whispered and asked if Mom and Dad knew. I smiled and took another sip of coffee. Not yet. I did not tell Mom and Dad. I did not need to. By the next morning, Jessica had. I knew because I woke up to 12 unread messages in the family group chat, a thread I usually muted unless there was a holiday or birthday to fake celebrate. The preview alone was enough. Mom was asking why I had gone behind their backs like this. Dad said we could have figured it out as a family. Eric wrote, "Thanks a lot, Jess." I opened the thread like I was walking into a burning house with popcorn. Mom was in full meltdown mode. She said she did not understand why I had not come to them if I knew Eric was struggling. She asked why I had handled it this way. Handled it what way? By not telling anyone that their precious golden child could not handle a mortgage. She said I had made my brother feel humiliated. She said I should have talked to him instead of just cutting him off. That was rich. I had paid for 8 months. I had said nothing, and now I was the villain for no longer funding the circus. Dad chimed in next. He said it was not about blame, it was about family. He said we stuck together, lifted each other up, and did not embarrass each other like that. But Eric mocking me in front of everyone at dinner did not qualify. Suddenly, I was the one bringing shame to the family because I pulled my money, not my mouth. I was still reading when Dad called. This time, I picked up. He skipped hello and said he was disappointed. I told him it was great to hear his voice too. He said this was not how family handled things. He said I could have come to them. I should have warned them. I leaned back in my chair and asked what I was supposed to warn them about. Was I supposed to warn them that I had been bailing out their son behind the scenes while they were busy toasting his success at dinner? Silence. Finally, Dad said, I had made Eric look small. I told him Eric did that. I just stopped editing the story for him. Another silence. Then Dad said, not everything had to be a performance. I actually laughed. I told him that was rich coming from the man who gave Eric a new car when he graduated and told me not everyone was college material when I got my HVAC license. He snapped that I was still bitter about that. I told him I was not bitter. I was just not pretending anymore. They had made it clear who mattered. I had finally taken the hint. He tried to backpedal and said they had never said I did not matter. I told him no, they had just shown me, repeatedly. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears trying to shift in his head. His voice softened and he said they had always supported me in their own way. I nodded even though he could not see it. I told him I knew. That was why Eric thought I would just keep paying his bills without asking, because that was how our family worked, right? I fixed. Eric shined. He said my name, but I told him I had to go because someone was at my door. That was a lie. But I needed space, and he was not earning another second of my peace. I hung up before he could reply. For the first time, the silence on my phone felt like relief instead of guilt. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica's brother, Mark. He said he just wanted to tell me that what I had done was solid. He said most people would have let it all burn, but I had tried. He said they just never saw it. I stared at that message longer than I should have. It was not just validation. It was recognition from someone who did not owe me anything. Someone outside the bubble had finally seen what they had all missed. And I realized maybe I was not crazy. Maybe I was just done pretending the silence was okay. It started with a drip. Not metaphorically, an actual drip in my parents' kitchen. On a Thursday night around 9:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. She said she was sorry to bother me, but they had a small leak under the sink and asked if I could come take a look that weekend. She said it was probably nothing. There was no emoji, which meant she was worried and trying not to sound like it. I stared at the message. 3 weeks earlier, I had been invisible at the dinner table. Now I was their emergency contact too. I did not reply. 5 minutes later, another message came in. Mom said Dad had tried to fix it, but she thought he had made it worse. Water was all over the cabinet now. She said I had always had a knack for that kind of thing. The compliments always came laced with need. I set my phone down and went back to folding laundry. At 10:17, she sent a third message. She asked if we could please just talk. That one stayed unread. The next day, I got a voicemail from Dad. He said that if I did not want to come, fine. But they were calling a plumber and sending me the bill if it turned out I had rigged something the last time I was there. There it was. When guilt did not work, they reached for blame. I had not touched the pipes in months. The last time I offered, Dad had told me they were not my clients. Now they were asking for a technician on call for free. Saturday afternoon, a photo appeared in the family group chat. It was their kitchen floor, soaked, towels everywhere. The caption said they were calling someone since Adam was clearly too busy. Underneath it, Eric wrote that they guessed they knew who really stuck around. That one made me laugh out loud. The man whose entire home would have been repossessed if I had not quietly covered his mortgage for almost a year was now pretending he was the dependable one. I did not respond. Instead, I screenshotted the chat and archived it. Then, I booked a massage. I had the whole afternoon off, and for once, I was not using it to crawl under a sink for people who only remembered me when things got wet and inconvenient. Sunday evening, another voicemail came in. This one was from Mom. Her voice was tired. She said she was not asking for much. She said they just needed someone they could count on. I used to be that person, and she did not know what had happened. I almost replied. Almost. But then I remembered all the Thanksgivings where I fixed their dryer while Eric made a toast about hard work. I remembered all the birthdays where my gifts were practical and his were thoughtful. I remembered all the family dinners where I sat at the edge of the table like furniture with a pulse. I had not changed. They had just noticed who I was after I stopped playing the part. That night, I opened a box from my storage closet. Inside was my old HVAC jacket, the first uniform I had ever worn. It had oil stains, a ripped pocket, and a faded name patch. I folded it neatly and tossed it into a bag with some tools I no longer used. The next morning, I dropped it off at a local trade school that ran a program for youth aging out of foster care. The guy at the front desk looked surprised when he pulled out a cordless drill. He said it was great gear and that some of those kids showed up with nothing but a beat-up wrench. I nodded and smiled, even though something clenched in my chest, because I remembered what that felt like. I left the bag. I did not leave my name. I did not need to. That day, I realized something. I used to give out of guilt, out of habit, out of some desperate hope that maybe my family would see me. Now, if I was going to give, it would be to people who saw value in what I did, not just in what I gave them for free. Then came Dad's birthday dinner. Mom made her famous overcooked pot roast, and everyone acted like it was a Michelin star event. Eric brought a bottle of wine he could not pronounce. Jessica smiled politely the way she always did when she did not want to be there. And me, I sat at the far end of the table again, like some distant cousin they had forgotten to uninvite. We were in the middle of the meal when Eric leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine like he was auditioning for a Finance Bro commercial. Then he said it, loud enough to make sure no one missed it. He asked if I was still alone. No wife, no kids, no life. He chuckled. Mom actually laughed too. Dad smiled behind his glass, like it was a joke everyone was in on but me. I did not flinch. I did not crack. I just set my fork down, slowly wiped my mouth with a napkin, and looked up. Calm. Steady. Measured. I told Eric he had no income either. The room went quiet. Then I told him that was why he had been living off me. And that was when it landed. Eric's smirk vanished. Dad blinked. Mom tilted her head confused. So I clarified just loud enough for everyone to hear. I told them I had paid Eric's mortgage for 8 months, quietly, because the bank was about to take the house and he had not told them. He had not even told Jessica. Jessica's head snapped toward Eric. Her jaw tightened. I told them that when the payment did not go through the week before, it was not a glitch. I had finally stopped. Eric looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Mom opened her mouth, but no words came. I looked at Eric and told him he mocked me for not having a family, but I was the one keeping his from falling apart. He just did not know because he never asked. The pot roast suddenly did not smell so great. I stood up, tucked in my chair, and looked around the table one last time. I told them I was not angry. I was just done. Done fixing things that none of them ever admitted were broken. Then I left. No slamming doors, no shouting. Just gone. That was the last family dinner I attended. A few months later, I hosted a get-together with friends at my place. People who had helped me build things. People who laughed with me, not at me. People who did not care whether I showed up with a partner or alone, as long as I showed up as myself. I did not check the family group chat that night, but I heard from a cousin later that Mom tried to toast my brother again. Something about persistence. Only this time, it did not land. Even Jessica did not raise her glass. Because now they all knew who had really held everything up, and who had finally put it down.